Welcome to Assumptions. This is the podcast where two friends, one an atheist, that's me, Kyle, and one a Christian,
that's me, Daniel,
sit down and try to understand each other's worldview.
That's right. And we are at the tail end of season 2 of Assumptions, which has been all about love, relationships, romance, community, sex. And it's been a busy season. This is the very end of it. And so what we've been doing, if you've been listening to the season up until now, is we've been asking for feedback and questions and submissions from you, the listeners. And we've got a handful of those that we're going to walk through. But first, one of our guests that we interviewed, we have not had the chance yet to play his full interview. And the reason is it just was shorter. It was like 15 minutes. So.
It's a quick 15 minutes, and I didn't feel like we should just release that as a full episode.
Yeah.
So this is my conversation with Fraser Tripp.
Yeah.
I fall down to my knees. Eyes are raised to the sky.
Fraser, I'm really excited to talk to you for multiple different reasons, but I'm very curious, as someone who identifies as gay, how do you feel like your relationships may be different than other people?
I guess with being gay, there's a lot of choice around who you can surround yourself with. The big thing in the gay community for a lot of folks is being able to choose your family. So there's this idea of selective family. We don't necessarily have to intermingle with the people that we were born into. I myself have a really great relationship with my biological family, but there's also this sense of community and just this culture around creating almost a second family.
When you were ready to, I guess, come out in that way, was that something that you struggled with, or was that something that was easier for you in the family that you were brought up in?
No, absolutely. I mean, coming out is never an easy process. It's one that continues for me on a day-to-day basis, but even having that really great relationship with my family, it's still a really terrifying thing to have to be able to do, because like you're never really sure how someone's going to react. You hear all of these horror stories about parents disowning children or just worrying about them because their life might be harder because they're seen as different. A lot of these sort of sentiments, I think, have started to fade over time, but there's absolutely still that issue going on. So prior to coming out, I spent a lot of time on YouTube watching coming out videos, reading books, a lot of like teen, like young adult novels about coming out. And so I built up strength in that and just sort of one day decided like, this is it. I have to. I've been out to a lot of my friends. I have a boyfriend who my parents have never met. And so I wanted to introduce that part of my life to them. So,
and I feel like that must be really, really difficult because you're almost living two different lives at the same time. Meaning that it's like, I want to be able to share this a little bit more with other people, but I'm afraid that I can't at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the way I got to spend time with my boyfriend when I wasn't out, I took late classes in university. And so rather than take the hour-long bus ride back into my neighborhood, I told my parents I was staying at a friend's place, sleeping on his couch. And that was only somewhat of a lie.
Right.
Didn't sleep on the couch, but was definitely staying at a friend of sorts. So it felt like a huge relief, actually, to be able to let them into that part of my life and not have to sort of tiptoe around them.
And on that too, I mean, I've read a lot of times with gay people coming out, it's almost like a constant thing that you have to do. It's not just like a one time, like, hey, this is the thing, by the way. It's like, no, I have to do this to every person I meet almost. And like you're constantly having to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, it happens even in small interactions, like going to a restaurant with my boyfriend. People may assume because we're two guys that we're taking our own bills there. But every time that we go and we ask for one check, that's almost a form of coming out in itself. If we walk down the street holding hands and we encounter somebody who one of us knows and maybe doesn't know the other, there's a coming out opportunity there or things like that. So,
was your family religious growing up?
Not particularly, no. Like I remember going to church at a very young age, but we stopped probably when I was about like 3 or 4.
do you feel antagonistic specifically to religion, or is that just something that doesn't really affect your life?
It hasn't really affected my life. It has, and I'm going to speak on his behalf, but it has affected my boyfriend's life because his family is or has been quite religious. And so the coming out process for him was definitely a stressful one. He came out much later in life than I have. So he waited until he was able to support himself, had his own sort of space to live, a job that could sustain him before he came out to his parents, because he was worried about those sort of scarier moments or scarier stories that we hear about coming out.
Yeah, Dan Savage talks about that a lot, about sometimes it's best to be in a place where you can come out instead of just doing it out of the blue. So it just depends on the person's situation. I know it's going to be different for every single person. Is your sexuality something that you feel is very tied to your identity, or is it just you wish it wasn't so tied to your identity?
I don't necessarily mind it being tied to my identity. And this was actually something I was thinking about on the way over here, because I figured, like, knowing that I was going to be doing this podcast at some point, that this may be a question. And I think to that sort of BuzzFeed video that just came out that's got everybody really angry because it's a bunch of gay men saying, I'm a gay man, but I'm not effeminate. I don't watch Drag Race, things like that. And, you know, there are parts of the so-called culture that you can pick and choose. And some people tend to be a little bit more straight acting. I hate that. Or they go in that more of a stereotypical way. And I actually really like some of the stereotypical things. I had drinks with a friend the other night, and she hadn't really seen me much since I had come out, and had basically said, like, it's sort of night and day. After you came out, you were sort of able to be yourself. So I think for me, that just meant sort of taking from some of the culture and being able to be a little bit more confident in myself. So I've drawn from things like RuPaul's Drag Race, where I see these really strong, like, powerful characters coming through, and I like to try and model myself after that in a way. But also I think it's personalities shine through at a certain point, and I wouldn't really change any of my links to the community in any way, because I find that they've strengthened me as a person too.
That's great. Do you mind if I share a story
Sure.
for a moment? So I'm bisexual specifically, and I really appreciate, like, representation, and I understand that there is this pushback that you said. That BuzzFeed video is a good example of, like, we're not all like the same thing. But I will say, when I was growing up, living in a very small Alberta community where this was not talked about, it was very frowned upon, and I felt very scared about ever opening up about myself. There was two examples, and I'm older than you, so I don't know if you'll even understand, but there's two big examples. And the first one, of all places, was on a show called Roseanne.
Right? Yeah.
And they lived in a small town in Illinois, but they had multiple gay characters start to appear on that show. And something that in the back of my head I thought was like the worst thing in the world was starting to slowly show me in the mid-90s. That's like, oh, maybe they're not like monsters. And then the other big one, even though my parents tried to not let me see it because I was too young, was the coming out episode on Ellen specifically.
Okay.
Like, that was such a big moment for me to be like, to see something like that represented in mainstream culture. It was like this huge watershed, and it was kind of this first little mini steps of me being able to, like, maybe I can be a bit more comfortable in my own skin. So even though I understand we're now way past those points in time, it's just, I think it's still important to have people be who they are, and not be looked down on if they do align with some of the more stereotypical things in the culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually feel like I've been sort of blessed with the internet
Yeah.
growing up, because I had access to forums and things like that, so I could interact with other gay men, sometimes of my age, sometimes I'm not sure, because internet and catfishing.
Yes, yeah.
Had access to things like Queer as Folk, or just a lot of different media representation out there.
Well, even you were talking about YouTube. I mean, early days of YouTube. I'm talking 2005, 2006. In the top 10 subscribed to channels, like half of them were gay people.
Yeah.
Like, it was like the place where they went to. It was like it was either you're gay or you're Asian, and like that was the top 10 list. It was like all these people, areas of our culture that was just not represented on traditional television. Okay, so have you dealt with bigotry in your life?
Oh yeah. Not in like super like confrontational ways, but there's definitely catcalling on the street. If people see me walking with my partner, we may get some flack for that. Not so much in Calgary, which was a big sort of surprise for me moving out here. I had this idea of it being this super socially conservative place, which to a degree it can be, but I've actually had more support as a gay man out here, I think, than I had back in Ottawa. I used to live in the Ottawa Village, which it's one of those ones, if you blink, you'll miss it. I lived right at the edge of it with 2 other gay men, and we basically joked all the time, we are the village. There was not a lot going on there. And I actually experienced more harassment in that area of town than I did anywhere else. Even just walking with one of my roommates, not holding hands, not making out, not doing anything particularly homosexual. And we got called out. The F word gets thrown around a lot, and you do hear that. And that really, like, you think you're over it at a certain point, but to have somebody hurl something like that at you, it just kind of hits you in the gut.
Yeah. How do you personally deal with that type of stuff?
I actually think about going back to drag queens. There's this Irish drag queen, Panty Bliss, who had this, essentially it was a rant. She went on about how every time she walked down the street and somebody would look at her funny or hurl an insult at her, she would check herself. Basically seeing, okay, what am I doing that is tipping you off to my sexuality? Whether that was like how she was walking down the street or how she was talking, that sort of thing. And at a certain point, she just sort of thought, can I swear on here?
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to own this and let it be me. So I thought of that in how I conduct myself and how I represent myself as a person out in public. And I don't give a fuck anymore. Like, I will walk with a little bit of a sway in my hip because I just like to walk to the beat of my own drum. I'll throw out a couple of drag queen words here and there. A yes every once in a while, that sort of thing. And I like to own that part of myself now. And in a way, it empowers me. And some recent example, a guy can ride by me on a bike, shout faggot at me, and it'll hurt. It absolutely hurts. But I won't let that ruin my day. I won't let it make my blood boil.
Right. That's good. I mean, you can't see this at home, but there is actual rainbows emanating from your eyes. So, you talked about community there before, about trying to find your own community, finding your own family. Where have you found your community?
So going back to the village, like, I had a lot of my first gay experiences in Toronto's village. So I wasn't out at the time. So again, sort of sneaking around. My first sort of experiences with gay culture in person were at a place called The Barn, which I'm pretty sure is closed now. It was an all ages night. And I just felt this great sense of community because here was this bar that was inviting these folks who wouldn't actually have access to the community at large because of their age. And so they had let them in. And I got to experience that with them. And then in Ottawa, I worked in a store that is owned by another gay man. It is very much part of the public community there and has allowed me to make connections in that way. But now in my own life, I surround myself with other gay men, people of different sexualities and different walks of life. And I think it's just made my outlook a lot more diverse and gives me the opportunity to experience a lot of new different things.
Why is diversity important?
I think if we all hung out with the same people or people that were exactly like us, there's no way that you're really going to grow as a person. You're going to get bored. I know I've been hanging out with myself a lot lately because I'm working from home, and it just kind of drives you a little bit nuts. So if you were to hang out with your twin or your clone, I guess twins are fine, but if you had a clone who talked and acted exactly like you, had the same points of view, there's no way for you to develop as a person.
Um, Not to put you or your boyfriend on the spot, but is marriage important to you?
That's always been a thing that like we've discussed. I put a timeline on marriage. I like we do have a bit of an age gap going on. So I was 19 when we started dating, and I've always gone with that sort of you're not fully developed as a person until you're at least 25. You're maturing, you're changing. Your outlook on life and where you are is going to be different because you're going through school. So I sort of put that timeline on there. I'm like, you're not allowed to propose until I turn 25. And he says that I keep moving that timeline now. So we're absolutely committed to each other. But with something like marriage and things like that, it's one of those things that I don't always necessarily see the need for. I see it as it's a great way to celebrate your relationship, but I feel like people blow it out of the water a little bit much. At this point, we are basically like common law. So we already have that sort of legal sort of connection going on within there to a point. And anything beyond that would just be more a way to bring together friends and family and celebrate what we've created together. So whether or not that needs to happen at City Hall or what, I don't necessarily see a full need for it right now.
Right. Last two questions. Number one, this is a bit of probably like a straw man argument. I'm going to recognize that. But I do know that a lot of people, when they talk about like pride and other things that are showcasing gay or alternate lifestyles, that seems to be really centered around sex specifically. I don't know how you respond to that.
I mean, I read the comments on the Sun articles after the Calgary Pride Parade happens, that sort of thing. And everybody blows up about the different sort of kink communities and fetish communities that take part in the parade. And then because of that, they discount this need for those pride celebrations or the right to be prideful, asking, why isn't there straight pride? Why isn't there that? There definitely is a connection to sort of sex because it's a sexuality. So it's that attraction to that same sex. But I think that just from an outsider's perspective, you see a lot more of that sexual nature going on because that's how it's represented in media. That's how it comes across as like in television, like this is a gay man because he is having sex with other men. You don't necessarily see those other aspects of his life. And so the characters tend to be a little bit more one-dimensional. And so with that, it's hard to separate the sex from the sexuality. But I think there is such a diverse community within the LGBT sort of rainbow, the queer community, that you can definitely find something that's not going to be sexual in there. So it does bug me a little bit that people latch onto that. But of course, there is that inherent sort of nature to it as well.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Fraser.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Before we go back to myself and Daniel, I need to tell you a few things. As always, Assumptions is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. If you haven't gone to the Alberta Podcast Network's website, there are so many great shows to listen to. This week, I want to highlight a podcast that has been very gracious to me, The Young Gaffers. This has Jason and Adam bring you their refreshing, ridiculous, and uniquely Canadian perspective on the soccer world. Now, even if you're not a sports fan, I still think you'll find this show enjoyable. Plus, it made me go and watch my very first soccer game in a pub a couple of weeks ago. Did you know they serve whiskey at 10 a.m.? Well, now you do. You can find it and all the great shows by going to albertapodcastnetwork.com. We also have a sponsor this week. Edmonton is the home of Canada's first and only non-fiction festival, LitFest. It's coming up very soon as it runs October 11th to 21st. It features dozens of events with writers from across the country and beyond, all sharing true stories and big ideas about culture, food, science, politics, and more. Among some of the writers are Dr. Brian Goldman of CBC Radio's White Coat, Black Art, Michael Hingston, author of Let's Go Exploring, Calvin and Hobbes, and Globe and Mail columnist Elizabeth Renzetti. And that's just a sample. There are many more listed at litfestalberta.org. Festival passes are only $129. 4-packs and single tickets will also be available. You can get $5 off by using the promo code APNROCKS. That's APNROCKS. Get your tickets today at litfestalberta.org. Thanks everyone for listening. This is the second to last episode for the season that never ends. But it's a good one. The conversation that you're about to listen to definitely goes to some unexpected places. So I don't want to stall any longer. Let's jump into that now. All right, Daniel, so that was the interview that I did. I think we mentioned last time how going forward we should probably be in the same room when we're interviewing our guests going forward.
It's not the Kyle Atheist show.
That's right.
But we did collaborate on the questions ahead of time.
We did. So
I know Fraser. I knew him from work. So it was great to actually hear a little more about his life. I see updates from Facebook and talk to him now and then, but haven't actually had the chance to hear his story. And that was my first time hearing this. Hearing that section.
Yes,
of the podcast.
in real time. We were actually listening to that just like as you were. There is no editing that goes on this show. So what were your immediate responses to what you heard?
I think it was important just to hear his story. And we talked about this when you told your story. It's easy to put people into a box, and it's easy to have identities around people and imagine why they have those identities. And just hearing the journey that was for him, and even the process of coming out to his family, and the hurt that he feels when people dehumanize him by yelling things at him. I think that's something that, there's a place for criticism, there's a place for accountability, but there's also a place just for hearing.
Yeah,
and
for listening.
Yeah.
I mean, what I was always so shocked by, I remember doing that conversation with him. This was like in the first couple of weeks that I believe Media Lab had been open for. And he came in here to sit
Your
down.
studio, Media Lab, yeah.
That's right. Plug. And he told me that story about how he felt that he was more harassed over in Ottawa than he's ever been harassed here in Calgary. And that always stood out for me because that is the exact opposite, I think, of what people would expect when they know about Alberta in general and how conservative we normally are in our politics over here versus the more like liberal hotspot that is Ottawa. Yeah. And also kind of reiterating some of the stuff that I've been talking about this season, in that you kind of have to find your own family versus necessarily being biologically born into the family and cultivating that family union, specifically with his boyfriend.
Sure. And it was interesting that at the beginning there he talked about selecting family and how that's different. And I was wondering, doesn't anybody do that though when you pursue a relationship? And like, there's this quote, I'll link to it in the show notes, that from one of my favorite writers on the Bible, Eugene Peterson. He talks about how in a relationship you have two strangers who become lovers. And it's just like, what a weird thing that is.
Yeah.
Like
really.
that's such, and I was thinking about it with Annie, my partner, and how like we were strangers once and now we're the closest. Like that, what a weird thing that is, and how that actually breaks down. I mean, you see it in political marriages, right? So you see it in back in the day, the royal kings and queens like this, but in a sense, so when someone would marry in order to lessen the threat of violence to opposing nations, right? But you think about society now, we don't do that anymore for good reasons, but it still does that. Relationships, romance, love connects strangers and builds community within a world that otherwise would be siloed into families.
To bring in some other religious figures, it actually reminds me of the three fates from Greek mythology, which I always forget what their names are. Clotho, Atropo, and something. I can't remember. Anyways, it's like the young girl, the middle-aged woman, and the old crone, and they are weaving the tapestry of life. That is what their role is. And so your thread might be intertwined with my thread for a little bit before it splits off into their own life journeys. So they're constantly taking threads and
hopefully not for another more season or two.
Yeah, I mean, we have to get that monetization to see it till the end.
Wait for the t-shirts to come out.
Yeah, wait for the t-shirts to be released, and then we can really sell out.
Yeah.
At that point. But
we have a great logo. I mean, I'm not opposed to a t-shirt with our logo on it.
I know.
Just saying, it's a pretty cool logo.
Hey, people, how much would you spend on a t-shirt of assumptions? But that idea of being intrinsically linked with people, like threaded together specifically into a garment of some kind. When you were two individual threads, I thought has always carried weight with me into that metaphor of life.
Yeah. And I don't know why. I mean, he's not here, Fraser, but why that's
Actually, he's
different.
actually behind that door over there. So,
Wow.
Fraser, come on. No, he's not.
But just also hearing that one of the themes that has been throughout both seasons of Assumptions is literature and storytelling, and how that was an influence for him, and just the representation on YouTube, and it was just interesting observing that. Yeah,
And why children, or not children's lit, but young adult novels and stuff like that really do have a lot of these different themes that sometimes even adult literature does not have.
But just that role of stories in shaping us as humans. Plug for our first season.
That's right. That's
But
right.
that was great.
Great conversation with Fraser.
Thank you,
for
Fraser.
sure.
Yeah, and now it's time to move on to the feedback that we've received.
Yeah, we got a lot of great things into our mailbox here.
Yeah.
I think we're going to start off with this voicemail that was sent to us at assumptionspod@gmail.com.
And this is from our supporter Alexander Williams. He
He usually goes by Alex Williams. But
does he? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's chatted with us on Twitter a couple times, and I really appreciate his support. So let's hear what he has to say.
Hey, Kyle and Daniel. It's been interesting to see over this past season some more of how our religions as well as upbringing can affect our value set, and how myself, despite being Christian, doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with every Christian on everything, and how your show helps us see that there are agreements and disagreements in so many different variety of ways. And I just really like what you're doing and look forward to next season.
Thank you so much for saying that, Alex.
Yeah.
I was really moved by that, because I think this is kind of proof to what our goal with this show has always been, which is to really listen to each other's point of view and understand a little bit about where they're coming from, and how we kind of say this all the time, but that you, Daniel, are not like representative of every Christian in the world, as I am not a representative of every atheist in the world.
We actually elect people to do that.
That's right.
Yeah,
The atheist actual meeting is coming up here tonight. So,
There's a
I have to
chance
jet
by the
over
time
there
we
pretty
post
soon.
this, you might actually be the representational
I'm
atheist.
the Lord Protector of atheism, yes. Warts and all. So the idea here that there are these broad swaths of different religions out there, and that there's different points of view, even in the same faith background, I think is important to point out.
Yeah, and even just I was thinking about it, Alexander, before I heard that comment. I was thinking about how Christianity, historic Christianity, there are distinctions to it. The Apostles' Creed, for example, the Nicene Creed, these are statements that affirmed what Christians around the world believe in, and there will be times where Christians or sects within Christianity split away from that, and then there have to be conversations of how
I think
orthodox
Martin
are
Luther
these
nailed
people.
something somewhere.
There's all kinds of, but within the historical confines of believing in these essentials, there is a lot of variation in terms of what that looks like in church practice, and variations in terms of what the specifics of theology. And because I think theology matters, what we believe about God shapes our lives. So it's important to these things do matter. They're not slight, but there is a lot of variation in that. And I think that's also encouraging, where even as someone who's growing in my own theology and changing my own theology, like I look back where I was even 2 years ago, or 3 or 5 or 7, 10 years ago, I was very different.
12 or 15, 20, 21. Just keep going.
I can't go much further than that,
Yeah.
though, right? But yeah, like I've grown a lot, and that doesn't mean I'm not Christian anymore, but it means that within there's room.
I think
There's limits, but there's room.
context and more information, and there is always also that concept, even though you were within the faith at a very early age, but there's no greater proselytizer than the newly converted, right? Like if you just switch to your religion, it's like, I'm going to be up here on the pulpit, like screaming at people to
That was me.
move,
So
come to their ways and that sort of
not
thing.
kidding there.
No, I know. But you know what I mean. It's like people grow and change over time.
Yeah.
And they can still hold their core beliefs. So like, there's a better way to communicate this message, and there's a more open way to communicate that message than.
Yeah, different ways to communicate. And even just looking at, I think that's one of the unique things about Christianity is it's a 2,000-year-old religion, and there's a lot of different styles of communication. And how does that? And that's encouraging, and that yeah, I'm growing into that. I
So
think.
real talk, do you, like, in the back of your mind, if you meet someone new, you're like, ugh, an Anglican?
I'm now an Anglican.
Are you
so-
really?
Yeah.
That is awesome. That's what I was baptized as an
Okay.
Anglican. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm an evangelical Anglican. Yeah.
So do you go like,
more.
ugh, they're Nazarene?
Sometimes. Well, because there are like avenues of Christianity. I'm just like, I think that's less and less historically Christian. That's like a culturally Christian, or just has a lot of problems with it. They might still, and then there are times I'm like, yeah, that's an offshoot of Christianity that I don't think is Christian anymore. I don't think that what they teach is the salvation. That is the basics of Christianity. It's more about what you do, or more about there's key things they don't believe in that are central to the Christian faith. Yeah. By the way, I'm assuming that there's only one kind of atheism, that there's like no variety within atheism.
There actually is probably like slight differentiations and stuff like that as you go through it. I mean, I kind of tend to more towards being like that humanist. I just did air quotes. People can't actually see that on the podcast.
No, they can't.
And I think there is something to be said about like there is a militant atheist versus like the person who's like, I just don't believe that there's a higher power, rather than the people who have to go and make people's lives at church like
I think back
worse.
to the Alan Jacobs quote, which you should all have memorized by now, but being like-hearted rather than like-minded. Like there's certain types of hearts within atheism that like those are people that they're atheists. But I mean, someone like Stephen Fry, right? Atheist, quite outgoing in sexuality. I disagree with him on a lot of things. I find him so fascinating, and I love his stuff. Like he's so curious. His TV show, Stephen Fry in America, is a blast.
great,
He's someone that is like-hearted, and I feel like I could have a conversation with him. But there's the other atheists who are just like, there's not much room to talk here. This is like,
you
and that's
just
true of
wanna shut me
Christians
down.
too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true of Christians. Yeah. All
I
right.
think this conversation actually bleeds over into our next comment. This
Yeah.
was left to us by April. I'm going to slightly condense what she writes here, but she wrote to us and said, in 2014, my husband and I were at a conference in Geneva and then took a private tour to CERN. I had been obsessed with the Large Hadron Collider since the Da Vinci Code. We got to meet the super smart scientists, including one that was present for the Higgs boson event, which was finding the God particle, if you didn't know. I knew I couldn't ask her an intelligent math question.
Nor could I, April. Don't feel
There's
too
no
bad.
way.
Yeah.
I'd be like, so, like, explain science to me. So instead, I asked, so you would have various scientists of different faiths witness this big event, the evidence of the God particle. Would it then prove, once and for all, which religion or belief was correct? And she replied with something like, every scientist still comes at experiments with their own eyes and beliefs. And then they witness this. It would just have them believe in what they believed in even more. The atheist would witness the experiment and it would reconfirm him being an atheist, even more so. Same with Christians, etc. Nobody crosses over to other beliefs. These highly educated scientists still bring a piece of themselves into the experiment or witnessing of the experiment. And I just like that story, that encapsulation, because I think this is also something that has been a little bit of a subtext to some of our conversations here this year, which is our outlooks, our worldviews. We can actually see the exact same thing happen in front of us, and we can have two totally different reactions to what we're seeing. Maybe I have an emotional response and you're like, I get nothing from this. Or you feel very inspired and I could be like, that is wrong, or whatever it happens to be. So I don't know. What do you think about this story that April shared with us?
Yeah, I think it's important when considering, especially science-related discussions. When I was a kid, I loved science. I have a lot of scientists in my family. My dad teaches science, thermodynamics, and my grandfather and my great-grandfather were notable scientists. So there's a lot of science. From listening to this, I'm much more of the left-brain type and prefer the humanities. But when you're having conversations about discussions about science and faith, like if you go out there, is there conclusive evidence that proves? And evidence is out there. Like I think it's important to consider it, but you are always going to come in with your assumptions and with your biases. And her story kind of, I think, to acknowledge that for anybody that's looking at the science world, like you're going to have assumptions about all kinds of things and your beliefs, and you're going to bring those into what you do. And being aware of those assumptions and knowing that you're going to be seeing the world through very specific glasses that you can't take off. Like you can't. It's very hard to take off your biases, and that applies to everything from culture to religion. And so it's important to be aware of that.
I want to dig into that a little bit deeper, actually. And I want you to ask me basically the same question
Sure.
after this, but what would it take for you to be like, you know what, this whole God thing, completely bunk? Like, what would it actually be that would be like, oh, which is a hard what if.
Yeah,
I
don't know,
but-
right? Like I think I don't necessarily think it'd be one thing. I think it would
yeah,
be
it'd be multiple things.
it'd be multiple things, and it would be a process that takes a while. And I was thinking, and when we first read this question, preparing for this recording this, I was thinking of, I'm going to bring Timothy Keller back in.
Yeah.
Eventually we should just interview him. I'm sure he'd be up for that.
I know, we should
And
ask
New York
him.
Times bestseller author, no big deal. But I was listening to a lecture he gave, a short talk, and he was talking about the three different elements that allow you to basically be strengthened in your faith.
Yeah.
And
Are these
he's-
like your 3 pillars that we're actually 4?
No, these are just
Okay,
three.
okay.
This is sorry. But he said, in order to have a belief shape your motives and your actions and your identity, that's really what it was. How do you have the gospel, in his case, so the belief of Christ and who we are in Christ, shape your identity? And he said there's 3 things. It's imaginative, repetitive, and communal. So imaginative meaning are the stories that you're being shaped by, and that includes the art that you're listening to, the music you sing at church, the stories that you see the world. Are they shaping you? It's repetitive. Are you doing this on a weekly, yearly, annually basis? So it's actually sinking in. And is it communal? The people that you associate with, are they shaping you as well? And so I think, to answer your question, it would have to be a mixture of those 3 to really shape me. It would have to be different things that I come across that shape my imagination in different paths, and it'd have to be frequent enough, or events that would really shake my belief, and then people that would confirm that. Is that
That is a valid way to go about it.
Okay.
It's not one master stroke. It's
That's
something.
right.
It's a death by 1,000 cuts, which is a
Yeah,
bad
yeah.
analogy to make. But what you asked me the same question.
Kyle? What would it take to change your faith, to give you faith?
To give, great. I was hoping you were going to ask me, just like, what would make you not believe in God? I'm like, well, Daniel, what would make me gain faith?
Yeah.
You know what? I think just like you,
If someone were to have a podcast with me for 3 seasons, by the 3rd season, man, I would come around.
that's a recurring joke. I want it by the end of this podcast to you be atheist and you be Christian. I think it'd be hilarious.
Very sad.
I think
Great
actually,
for you, though.
I think unlike your answer, there could be like a witness to a miracle that I would be like, there is no way else to explain this than to say that there is something.
But
out
isn't
there
that her
looking for
point
us.
of that story? Is that you're going to see those events
Exactly,
and come
right.
up with
I'm going to come up with
something.
Like, there's some randoms. There's some law of physics that,
Yeah.
that caused this. It would actually literally have to be like an angel coming down from the heavens to be like, oh, okay. I will say this. I do get really weirded out by watching movies that have exorcisms in them. And they really just freak me out a whole lot, because I'm like, in real life, I would feel that what you're doing right now is hurting like someone who's very mentally ill, and you're just not really helping them.
Oh, so you're
at all.
weirded out not because this.
Oh,
is
I'm also weirded out
unexplainable.
because there is some like demon inside somebody.
Sorry, so just to clarify, like you're weirded out, like you're talking about angels and how that would convince you, and then you said demon.
Demons are the reverse of that, where it's like I get really freaked out. By
Is that
this
because
idea.
this evil is there?
Yeah, it's an actual like realized physical evil that is inside someone. It's not just human decision and human thought and stuff that's
there's
going
something,
in there.
and that comes back.
To feel like I have been taken under control by
Yeah.
some other being and then
Right.
forcing to do something against
Sure.
my will. Like
That's terrifying.
Totally freaks
especially
me out.
for a rational based argument, right? Like, we kind of goes back to our first season where we talked about horror movies and how horror movies, why are they so popular in an age that's a secular age,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a ghost in the machine.
Well, that, and I think, it is taking away their free will in some way. I think that scares a whole lot of people. I do think that I could be convinced over a bunch of small things over time. And I think it all comes down to the way religion or Christianity in specifically is presented and brought out. Like the conversations we've had this year of people being like, no, we want to welcome other people into our fold. We're not trying to be exclude people from our ranks and stuff like that. I still would have a hard time probably flipping that switch of being like, I actually believe in a higher power. it would be more like I want to be here because of the community aspect of it than it is like I'm gung-ho about a supernatural being that overlooks everything that I do on a daily life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. And I mean, I think just acknowledging that too, like we are shaped by what is around us in ways that are very hard to shake.
But to wrap up this conversation or this part of the conversation, I think it is what's good about this is to be acknowledging of that. And I try and make it very clear when we're having these conversations and elsewhere, like, this is my bias that I'm coming up with right now. And so I want to be very clear that I'm thinking this because of this thing that has happened already. And so that's what's impacting my outlook on what I'm viewing here right now.
Yeah.
But someone else might have a different opinion about what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
I have
aunt
some
had
questions
some,
from Dorothy. So
yeah.
I have 2 questions from her.
So
she
she's
sent
your
me
aunt.
throughout. She's my aunt. Yeah. So
Is it mother's side, father's side?
dad's side. Yeah, and I actually grew up with her. Some early years of my probably till I was like 5. We lived in the same house. She had a basement suite, and so it was quite close growing up. And she's an avid listener and supporter of the show.
Oh, great.
And gives us a lot of
She would buy a t-shirt
encouraging
for sure.
feedback. Yeah, she'd buy a t-shirt. She totally would. Hi, Daniel. My main question is with regards to what hasn't been talked about on your podcast, which is the psychological effect of sex. The reason I mention that is because of the incredibly strong feelings and emotions that are experienced when there's a breakage in a relationship due to unfaithfulness in committed monogamous relationships. You talk about the purpose of sex being the obvious procreation, and the next one is pleasure. I was amused by Barry's explanation of this, and that any bodily function has for pleasure, be it eating or whatever. As someone who has never had sex because I've been saving it for the right person who still hasn't come, I can say to someone who has been having sex throughout their entire adult life but not married that it is possible to live without sex and be quite happy once you begin. Or to be quite happy. Once you begin, it is very difficult to stop. That does not negate the heartache which occurs when someone's first relationship breaks up, especially because of one of the partners wanting intimacy with someone else. The heartache is tremendous, and there must be reason for that. And I believe it's partly psychological and partly the whole point of a monogamous relationship. So I guess you're just quite like asking, why is there, even if you don't have sex in a relationship and you still break up, even that is painful. And that drives something deep underneath. And why is it? I think I asked you this question back in our sex episode 3 or 2.
I think it's 2.
Yeah. Asking like, why is it that adultery is still frowned upon? When if you're sleeping around before you get married, that still is, you're still doing the same thing. Like, there's the same act is happening, right? You're still having sex with someone who you're not going to be committed to for life. So bring it back to her
there's
question,
a lot of
right?
there's
Like
a-
her question is like, the psychological effect of that, and why, and especially in a monogamous relationship, why does that hurt so much?
I think there's 2 different questions actually being asked here. So
Do you want to see it?
I'm
You have-
going to try and address this in the way that I think she's asking, which
Yeah.
is, if sex isn't the most important thing, then why does it feel like such a betrayal if people are sleeping around with other people? That's what I interpret the question to be.
Yeah.
And I think that while sex is not the most important thing, I still think it is in most monogamous relationships and any relationship, sex is that expression of love and commitment that you're giving to your partner. And I think the subtext is supposed to be like, I'm only doing this with you.
Something special I'm giving
Unless
you
it's
that's
very
nobody else.
open and talked about beforehand that no, we're okay with having sex with other people, and that conversation has been had there. And so I think when that happens, then we talked about guilt a whole lot in our last 2 wrap-up episodes, of it feeling like was there something that I did? Did I push them towards this? Am I not desirable enough for them to only want me? And as far as the person who's cheating on the other person, is that just a compulsion because they can do it, or is it them just not being able to communicate properly about what they're not receiving, and they think that sex is what they're actually looking for, when it probably isn't what they're looking for as far as that goes?
I lost you there on that last.
What I'm trying to say is that if someone cheats on somebody else,
Yeah.
Are
does
they
that matter?
searching for sex,
Oh.
or are they searching for something that they think sex is going to provide to them? And my argument would be is that they're probably just not being very communicative to their partner, saying, I'm looking for this or I need this. So they go searching for a way to fulfill what they're looking for, thinking that sex is the answer, and it probably isn't. That's my guess. I am no sex researcher or like anthropologist or that sort of thing, but I would guess that's probably a lot of what drives people
Is
to do that.
the desire for feeling wanted?
I think feeling wanted is a big part of it,
Right.
but something like I need a certain type of companionship or I need a certain
And
way
that's
to express my
driving
life. Yeah.
Adultery, you mean, or leaving relationships, or
I'm talking specifically, yes, about the person who has chosen to be an adulterer.
Right.
So I'm going to go and cheat on my
Sure.
significant other because they're not giving me something that
right,
I
right.
want to have.
right.
My argument is that it's probably not sex that's what they're actually looking for. They
Right.
think sex is what is going to give them what they're looking for. But what they're probably looking for is like someone who's listening to them, someone who's making them feel wanted, someone who is making them feel younger, someone who's making them do all these other things. And so they're searching for that. I don't think it's the right way to do it. I'm not
No,
trying to say
yeah,
like
I have
this.
a lot of things to say to that.
I'm not
but,
trying to like.
But is that her question?
for.
Dorothy's question is that
Well, she asked specifically about why is it
why does it hurt
why does
so
it feel
much?
why does it hurt so much when
and so
someone goes
okay,
to,
so you're saying it hurts because this person's no longer feeling that way. They're no
exactly
longer-
someone else
Okay.
is being able to provide this thing that I want to be
Okay.
giving to them, but somehow I'm not giving it to them. And I don't think that's right necessarily to feel that way, but I think that that's all wrapped up together.
So you're saying that adultery hurts,
Mm-hmm.
or sleeping around hurts. There's guilt involved with that, not because the act itself has any significance. Any loosely, right?
Sex is
Moral
sex, yeah.
significance,
So, I
right?
mean, like, it's not like me having sex with another person is physically hurting somebody else. I'm not
Right.
imposing harm on that other person, but it's going to impose psychological
and that's
harm.
because they feel rejected,
Yeah.
right?
I think I would. If you found out that Annie was going around with other men, I'm sure you would have a big hurt to your psyche.
Yeah, but I don't know if that. I think it's more. I don't know. It's a good question because if she were flirting with other men, right, even that would hurt, right?
Yeah.
So then, is the flirting also part of that sexual act? Like, even if she weren't sleeping around with other people, like sleeping around, like itself, like why is it then that if someone flirts, or even like looking at porn, which I think is awful, it shouldn't be done. But if someone looks at porn in a marriage relationship, that is same thing, right? They're rejecting that person because, but that's still somehow we have we put less, like that still is bad and needs to be worked through and gotten rid of. But if someone were to look at porn who's married, then go and have an affair with someone, wouldn't that affair hurt even more than the porn?
Yeah, I think you're right. I
And
think you're right on
and so I'm
that.
wondering if the act itself, like, yeah, there's all the associations with it that you talk about, and that can come with flirting and whatever else you're doing. But
I think you're right. I think
what she's
flirting
saying, yeah.
or even just talking to somebody else, like
Yeah.
online, like
Yeah.
you're not even
Yeah.
meeting in real life.
Yeah.
You're right. I
Yeah.
think that would be hurtful.
Yeah.
And I'd feel awful.
Yeah, for the reasons you mentioned,
But
probably
there,
for part
but
of
if
it.
someone was
And the
actually
betrayal, right?
yeah,
And-
and
yeah.
if someone was actually sleeping with someone else, there is another
Right.
elevated hurt to
Right.
that. I think there's a bunch of different reasons for that. Number one, again, I think our culture elevates sex to be
Mm-hmm.
one of the most important things that happens in that committed relationship. So if you're doing that with somebody else, you're essentially rejecting your partner
Right.
and saying you're not good enough.
Right, and so
I
like
have to go find someone else.
Is that just cultural, or is that actually what's happening?
I think it's both. I think there is a lot of culture that's wrapped up into there.
Sure.
But going back to, again, my very much armchair like prognostication, I would love to have a scientist or some sort of researcher come on and tell me the actuality behind this. But I think a lot of issues in relationships, both mine and others that I observed, it comes down to communication, where you're not being open and honest, whether you don't feel you can be, or you've been conditioned to say that you can't, or you've been shut down in the past by your partner saying that I don't want to talk about that sort of stuff, whether it's different kinks or there's different ways you want to express your love, or you were led to believe that sex was going to be one way, but it has turned out not to be that way. You feel that, okay, I'm in this relationship, I'm not getting what I think I need out of this relationship, I'm going to go find someone else who I think is going to provide that to me. And I think you might find out that it's not the case. It's not sex itself that you're searching for or trying to find. It's something else deeper than that. And I think if you are having that impulse to cheat on someone, I think you need to peel back the layers and see, is it, or is there actually something that I'm not getting in my current relationship that I should have an open conversation about with my partner?
Or is it just selfishness?
It could just be selfish.
Right?
The guy could just be an asshole too.
But I one of the things, I'm going to bring him back in, Tim Keller, because I've read his book on marriage, and he talks about how he's a chapter on sex. He's talking about how he's like, when we first have sex, it's really awkward, but when you do it more and more, you get better at it. And he said that
it's like golf.
the thing that kind of drives that is like, what pleases my partner more? Like, yeah, there's a certain art, like what gives me pleasure, that's part of it. But like, really, if it's a healthy relationship, it's what is pleasing that partner, what is giving them, melting them, right?
Yeah.
And how can I
think
do
you're
more
hitting
of
actually on
that?
something really, really important.
And
this is something that we talked about. This is going to sound weird, but in a friendship relationship, right? We were talking about how giving a lot is automatically going to give you a lot.
That's
of
right.
stuff
I think it
in
was
return.
Tyler in his interview that talked about that.
And if we switch that now to like a romantic relationship, and especially when we talk about sexual relations inside of that relationship, the more giving you can be is automatically, or should automatically, give you stuff in return. And if you're not getting in return, again, that's time for a conversation.
Yeah, and I mean that's where, like, if you're looking for pleasure on your own, of course cheating on someone's going to be more pleasurable, right?
Yeah.
Like, of course there's always going to be someone hotter that's going to be more pleasurable.
It's the Tinder
right?
awful thing, right?
Yeah.
You keep swiping.
Yeah,
There's
you can always
gonna be
find someone else, and that's gonna. But is that what sex is for? Is to give you pleasure, or is it to unite this relationship and strengthen the relationship and give joy to this other person who has shown their love for you in so many ways? Like that's I think why, like, in a relationship now, we're not married, we haven't had sex yet. But when I think about what it means if I do get married to Annie, and you know, what would that act actually mean to me? Well, in a sense, it's me saying, look, you've meant so much to me, Annie, and you've honored me so much with your love, and you have built me up with all these multiple ways that you've cared for me and shown affection to me and have grown to admire me, and I have for you. And as a result of that, I want to give you this part of me that I only want to give to you. And so the sexual union then is a way to, I mean, the act itself has pleasure, that's true. But that's not what I'm thinking of in that relationship so much. It's more, I want to open myself up completely to this person in a way that I haven't yet. And I want to give something of myself that I've not given to anyone else before, and that I won't give anyone else, because of a reflection of who this person is to me. And so to take that act and what that means and take it out of the context of that love and of that growth, I just feel like you're divorced. Like, yeah, you're still gonna have the fun and the pleasure of it, but that's like skipping. It's like it's like gorging a hamburger on your own instead of having a beautiful feast and eating on a beautiful feast. Like, there's so much more associated with this that. Yeah,
but using that analogy, because I think I agree with like 85% of what you just said. Like, I really align a lot with what you just said within a committed relationship.
Yeah.
Where I guess I would come up with is like, sometimes I just want to have a hamburger. You
I know,
what I mean?
but
like sometimes it's okay just to have sex for fun, and that's where my point is.
But then, like, so if given that relationship, if I've had sex and I'm not saying like if there's someone who is. Like, you've told your stories of having sex in hotel rooms and feeling guilty. So I'm saying there's guilt and there's like mistakes we make, and that's in Christ we can start again. That guilt has been taken away, and that's not like you're not a ruined virgin. Like, that's not going to ruin you. But at the same time, if I'm going to be having it for fun, doesn't that really cheapen that that's that when I then come to that place in a relationship where I want to give myself in that way. If I've made a habit of doing that all the time, and I'm continually making that habit, that's my mindset. I can have that beautiful feast, but I can also just have a hamburger in a back alley if I want. Like, I
guess what I'm talking about, but I'm not talking about it at the same time.
No, okay, so you're saying you can have your stage of having fun.
Yes,
but then you start to meet someone, and now it's different.
I think it's like when you grow up, it's like, yeah, I used to have this is disgusting, but I used to like have fast food every single night in my early 20s when I had a better metabolism than I do now. I could not do that now. I'd be like 600 pounds. But now I appreciate higher quality food, and I prefer to go for higher quality food, and I'm willing to. This is going to be a bad analogy. I was going to say I'm willing to pay for higher quality food. I don't want to put that into what we're talking about here. That has a bad connotation. What I'm trying to say is that it's okay to have fun. and have sex when you want to have sex in that type of relationship, whether it's a one night stand or not. However, when you've said I am now with this person,
Yeah.
then yes.
But
you
when
should
does
be
that
honoring them.
change, right? Like,
That's going to be different for each person. I think when you were in a relationship, you should be honoring that relationship. I guess is where I come down.
I
on
guess,
that.
but I guess like then that and it comes back to we talked about Tinder and just what Tinder encourages. Like it's the same thing. Well, I'm not looking for a relationship because of how this person will love me and grow, and I'll love this person and grow with this person and discover that joy of that person. It's like, oh, I want to, just swear on the podcast. I want to fuck someone. Like that's that's what I'm into. I just want to do that. But then to all of a sudden go, well, actually, I like this person a lot. Cool. I've been really enjoying this in the bedroom with them. Well, now I want to turn this into a relationship. Well, that that's
it's
you know what I mean? Like
harder.
that's a
I
very
get it.
different scenario than the one I outlined. That,
100% I agree with that.
and
I think it's
yeah.
absolutely doable that you can actually do it that way.
But and I think that's where the food analogy kind of, I don't know, like
I think we're starting around the same thing. We're
Yeah.
just coming at it from different sides.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've talked about this before.
Okay.
What is your view on masturbation then?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a t-shirt there.
What's your view on masturbation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh, that's a good question.
Because why I bring that
yeah.
up is
No,
I was
it's
actually thinking about
totally
this the
fair,
other
yeah.
day. Is that to share a lot more than probably people want to know about? Is that I think oftentimes when I'm either super stressed out about something or obsessing over a person that I might want to ask out or something like that, sometimes doing that act
Sure.
lessens the stress
Sure.
and lets me focus and be like, oh no, I don't want. That's actually not something I want to pursue. This is my hormones getting in the way of me making a rational decision.
Right.
And so that's why I'm a big proponent sometimes of people doing that, self-pleasuring, because sometimes that just reclarifies like, oh, that's literally just hormones like
Sure.
wreaking havoc.
Right. Yeah, and even just like people that don't. I guess like the term self-sex is sometimes what I think of when I think of masturbation.
Yeah.
So I don't engage in that because I just think that is cheapening it in a way.
Sure.
Now I do find sexual release through things like working out or things like.
Gotcha.
So like, there's other ways that same like I'm really hormone driven right now. This is affecting me. I want to
Go for like a couple mile run or something.
or go to the gym, and that will do that for me. Like it will, and very similar, but it's not. And I've had a lot of guilt over that. Like, well, how is this? And ultimately, I guess like that's a different act than what the sexual union is. Like there's a lot of similar experiences. Like it can maybe feel similar, but like it's still something fundamentally different about joining yourself to someone in a way that masturbation just doesn't do. Sure. And so I think there's part of it where it's just like, look, like our anatomy works where like you will have nocturnal releases, you'll have ways of releasing this stuff, right? Like again, we're getting messy here, literally.
Yeah.
But like the body's designed to do that. That's okay. But but then like is watching porn and doing it, like that kind of sense where you're like, well, that's getting a little more tricky now. Like think about someone and doing it. I don't do that. I don't do that. My body will still do it for me, right? At times, but that's not a sexually driven context. So that's kind of where like I kind of maneuver that. It's like, look, our bodies are built to have these releases, and that's fine. And there's ways like working out that will kind of help me do that, and that's fine. But if it's designed in a sexual context, then in a way it's kind of self-sex. So it's taking all that this body that's a gift that I could give to someone. And I can say, well, actually, I'm just doing, and that's kind of it's intrinsically selfish, I think.
It's the ultimate selfish
So
act.
yeah. But I guess what I'm saying, the reason why your question, which is why is that different, right? Like, how does that play in? Well, when you're joining with someone, that's a very communal act, and that's a sign of. I think it should be a sign of something, and a protector of something, and a strengthening of something that needs more than just pleasure.
Yeah.
Wow, didn't know we would cover that.
I know that was an interesting conversation.
I think Joy Beth in her interview actually mentioned it a little bit, didn't she? So we were not the first to bring it up. She was the first to swear, not me.
That's right. Let it be known.
She was the first to talk masturbation. Yeah.
Did we answer your aunt's question?
I don't know. We'd have to ask her.
I guess so.
Yeah.
She can give us some feedback here about where we went
where
there
we're
in
at.
that topic.
It was definitely, we've circled around the issue quite a bit, and it was a fascinating discussion of it. Hey,
What was
we're running late though. We're getting into like
the
hour
40-minute mark? Yeah.
Well, no, because you have the interview as well.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yeah.
So let's do this. We have about 3 more questions that came in from our listeners. We are going to do another episode with those questions. I know the last one gets into a bit of our history as friends, so I think we might take some longer time.
And there's one
Discuss
more
that
question
one.
from your aunt as well? Or
Yeah,
are
it was
we-
from Ant, so 3 questions.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So this has been the first part of it. Stay tuned in a couple weeks. We'll be back with those other questions.
That's right. So as we always do,
Yep.
if you want to follow us, get in contact with us, we're essentially Assumptions Pod on every platform.
Yep.
So Instagram, Facebook,
Yep.
Twitter. AssumptionsPod@gmail.com is where
And
you
guess
can
what?
send feedback to if you would like.
That's our website too.
That's our website too,
AssumptionsPod.com.
assumptionspod.com. If you want to follow me, Twitter's probably the best way. I'm at the Kyle Marshall with 2 L's. And what's your website there?
It's DanielMelvilleJones.com. Here's the fun thing. We are still trying to decide what to do for our 3rd season.
Mm-hmm.
So we are still working out our own ideas, but we'd love to hear what you want us to talk about. So if there's certain topics or certain broader areas, give us a buzz. Let us know. Send us that email or give us a shout on social media.
Perfect. Have a great day.
Bye.
Assumptions is produced by Kyle Marshall and Daniel Melville Jones. This episode was edited by Kyle Marshall. Our thumbnail was created by the always great Chris Taniguchi. Most of the music in this episode is from the band The Parson Redheads. You can check out their music anywhere digital music is available. If you want a full rundown of the articles and media that we referenced, check out the show notes that Daniel puts together that are attached to this episode. It's always a detailed document that he puts together. Thanks for listening to the credits. We'll be back to officially wrap up the season and answer those last few questions in a couple of weeks.